What are we discussing on today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast? Why you can't sleep on the D-backs with the remaining top MLB free agents? And do the D-backs have the best value position players in Major League Baseball?
You are Locked on Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. You're listening to who? The always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas. I'm a multimedia journalist and I'm a graphic designer, so please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com. On there you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles, my photos, and my graphic design. If you want to see more content by me, please follow me on Twitter, at CareerThomas24 for the personal Twitter account, or look up Locked on Diamondbacks, both Twitter and Instagram for the podcast handle. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets. If your first $5 bet wins, visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, we're discussing the D-backs and their chances of still landing some of these top MLB free agents. Do the D-backs have maybe the best valued position players in the sport? And we'll take a look at some contracts of guys who could potentially be leaving Arizona soon. So a whole bunch I want to talk to you guys on today's podcast. Thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free. It's available on all platforms, so please continue to tell your friends. And one of those platforms is YouTube. Please hit subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube. Now let's get back to the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, and let's discuss the idea of the D-backs still being in on some of these top MLB free agents. And one guy I specifically want to talk about is the little Roki Sasaki, because we know at the winter meetings, he seemed to be the D-backs' number one free agent target, number one guy that they wanted to get, maybe the best pitcher on the market. Some would say, arguably, I mean, he is the youngest. He can throw 100 miles per hour, nasty split finger, like the arsenal is there, the age, like all that you really like. Plus, he's a guy who's an amateur free agent, so there's no bidding war for him. The most he's going to get is like $7.5 million. Like, it's all the same with Roki. And so because of that, it felt like the D-backs really wanted him. Obviously, with the talent and the money, the D-backs wanted to get Roki, add him to this rotation, especially we know teams like the Dodgers, the Padres, probably the Giants too. Like, all of them are invested, interested in making meetings and pitches to Roki Sasaki. So, of course, the D-backs also want to go after him. But now seeing this Corbin Burnes contract, him getting his new, him getting the new franchise record-breaking deal from the D-backs, John Gamador of Arizona Sports is saying the D-backs now getting Roki Sasaki seems very unlikely. But even with him saying that, I still want to step back. I still want to give grace to the D-backs front office, to Mike Hazen. Even after the franchise record-setting Corbin Burnes money, I still wouldn't be surprised if the Arizona Diamondbacks, if Mike Hazen in the front office, go out there and still make a splash play, whether it's Roki Sasaki or one of these top MLB free agents that are still available. The D-backs so far this offseason have showed you they're not afraid to spend money. Ken Kendrick has been one of the best owners in baseball right now. Top 3, if you look at the revenue you're making and then putting that money back into your team, the D-backs are like top 2, top 3 in Major League Baseball at doing that. And so the odds of them, the idea of them going out there and getting one of these top MLB free agents, I still think it's possible, even after giving Corbin Burnes all that money, because Roki Sasaki won't break the bank. I don't want to take the D-backs out of that running. It sounds like Roki's starting to narrow down his list of teams right now. It hasn't been reported yet that the D-backs are one of those teams, but if they're still in the race, like, why wouldn't you go out there and try to go get one of the best pitchers available? Yes, your rotation would be clogged up if you have Burnes, Gallen, Kelly, Sasaki, Fott, Monty, Erod, Ryan Nelson. Like, yeah, that's way too many guys. But a year from now, there's a world where you don't have Monty, Gallen, or Kelly. And so if you had a rotation still of Burnes, and you still had Sasaki, you still had Fott and Erod. Like, that's still an elite rotation in Major League Baseball. So I still think, even though the D-backs have already been spending a lot of money on some players this offseason, like we saw with Corbin Burnes, I still don't want to just believe, because of that big splash play, that now they're only going to be looking at like the second and third, fourth tier free agents. I still want to believe that they can go out there and potentially make a splash play. And a guy like Sasaki is a guy who won't even break the bank. So yes, the odds of him going somewhere else where he has a more clear role, because right now, I mean, where would Sasaki fit in the rotation? Like number 3 starter, you go Burnes, Gallen, Sasaki. Kelly is your 4. And then who's your 5? Fott or Erod? Like, that's a crazy conversation to have. So I don't want to take the D-backs out the Sasaki running, even though I would say the odds of getting them are very unlikely. But even looking at some of these other top MLB free agents, like there's still 2 other guys that right now the D-backs have kind of, there's been some speculation that the D-backs have flirted with these guys, but it doesn't seem like there's too serious about it. But a Santander and Tanner Scott seems like the 2 best players still available at their respective positions. If you're looking for like a power hitting outfield DH, like there's probably no one better than Santander, who is projected to get like a pretty decent contract this offseason, right? If Jock Peterson's getting around 18 million, if Christian Walker's getting around 20 million, like Santander is probably going to be in that mode too, as a guy who hit 44 home runs last year, 28 the year before, and 33 the year prior to that. Like, this has been a power hitting machine the last 3 seasons. So he's probably going to get around that mark. A guy like Tanner Scott, coming off a really fantastic season, has really turned himself into one of the best closers in Major League Baseball over the last couple years. He's been really, really dominant. What he did with Miami this past year, maybe it wasn't as elite with the Padres, but over the last couple of years, he has looked really nasty. And so I would like to believe the D-backs are still in on some of these top MLB free agents, and like money is not going to scare them away. They definitely seem more inclined, if they're going to drop a bag on someone, definitely feels like they're more inclined to drop it on a pitcher as opposed to a position player. That's why if the D-backs were going to drop a bag on someone, it's probably more likely to be like a Tanner Scott as opposed to a Santander. I think you could still go out there and probably get like Randall Grichuk at a way cheaper value if you're Mike Hazen, feel good about yourself. But knowing the bullpen and the closing situation has been maybe the biggest contempt with this D-backs team over the last few years. Since I've taken over this podcast, I've discussed the back end of the bullpen has been maybe the biggest issue of Arizona. And so I would not be surprised if Mike Hazen's like, you know what? Screw it. Let's just go drop a bag on Tanner Scott and get ourselves a great back end guy. If not him, we know the D-backs have been reportedly linked to Kirby Yates. I would love Kirby Yates. I know he has a walk rate issues, but this is the guy who averages like 15 strikeouts per 9 innings in his career. I think he's a really good back-end reliever that could get a lot of strikeouts. And then you talk about the back end for the D-backs, the strikeout ability of Martinez, AJ Puck, and then you throw in a little Kirby Yates. Even a guy like Gankel's pretty good. Like, there's a lot of swing and miss stuff all of a sudden in the back end of the D-backs bullpen. So don't sleep on Mike Hazen and this D-backs front office. Despite dropping a franchise record-breaking bag on Corbin Burnes, don't sleep on them with the rest of the top MLB free agents. But we know Mike Hazen, if he's paying someone, he's typically going to pay a pitcher. That's why I believe the D-backs have the best valued position players in Major League Baseball, and we'll discuss if that's true, my little statement in segment number 2. And if you're looking to buy tickets to an upcoming sport or an event, then the best place to do that, of course, is going to be GameTime, because GameTime is the best place for last-minute deals on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. They have this feature called All-In Pricing. When you toggle this feature on, it shows you your total cost upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. You could get a panoramic view from your seat before you buy. They also have the lowest price guarantee, or GameTime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right. Let's get back into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. And like we discussed, when you look at Mike Hazen and his track record over the last couple seasons, you look at Corbin Burnes, franchise record-breaking money, 6 years, $210 million, a lot of dough for Corbin Burnes. And I think we're all excited for Burnes, like I did the breakdown on the podcast earlier this week, comparing Burnes' contract to Blake Snell and Max Fried. Burnes got the best deal of the three. Don't let anyone fool you. Go back and listen to this podcast earlier this week so you can hear the full breakdown. So Mike Hazen already dropped the bag on Burnes. We know Erod last year, he got a bag. He's getting around $20 million a year for the next 4 seasons. Monty last year got like over $20 million a year for 2 years. We've seen him drop the bag on Madison Bumgarner before. Like, if the D-backs are going to go out there and really spend money on someone in free agency, we know it's probably going to be starting pitching. When you look at a lot of these NL lineups, we know they're loaded. When you look at the Phillies and the Braves and the Dodgers, and the Mets just dropped $750 million on Juan Soto. Like, Mike Hazen's looking at the landscape and saying, we need pitching. We need to slow down these incredible lineups. And also, all these incredible lineups have rotations to back it up. Pitching is the most important thing right now in Mike Hazen's mind. And that's why he has spent all this money on pitching, but still has found a way to get really high-valued players at every position around the diamond from your position players. And guys who are all-stars, guys who are MVP-level guys, and all at great deals, great contracts. And that's really what I want to discuss, because I believe, especially considering, again, the D-backs just led the NL run scored. That's not going to happen again, probably, most likely because of Walker, Jock, and Grichuk leaving. But I think the D-backs can still be a top 5 offense in the NL. And to do that with not really paying anyone big money on your roster, I think that's really impressive. Like we've discussed, this D-backs team spends money on their team like a big market team relative to their revenue, right? They're spending 2/3 of their revenue back on their team, just like the LA Dodgers do as well. And that's why the D-backs, and it's not just the D-backs spending that money, they're doing it in a smart way. They're getting these really good players on very good deals and getting the most out of them at almost every position. And when you go up and down every position Major League Baseball, you can look at a D-back player and say, oh my God, he's only on that salary. He's only on that contract. A guy like Gabriel Moreno, catcher, we know how good he is. He's only going to make $800K this upcoming year. You look at first base. We love Christian Walker at $20 million. Josh Naylor, 7 years younger, making $14 million. 8th highest paid first baseman in the league. You know who's right behind him? Paul Goldschmidt and Carlos Santana, 37, 38 years old. So we get a guy who is only 27 years old, making millions of dollars less than Christian Walker and only like a couple million more, $1.5 million more than Paul Goldschmidt. Like, yes, give me 27-year-old Josh Naylor at that point. Ketel Marte, best season of his career, MVP finalist, or at least was he a finalist? He should have been, right? Hold on, I gotta double check that. I'm pretty sure Ketel Marte was an MVP finalist. It's been so long. Yes, he should have finished second MVP voting. He should have been the runner-up. But Marte, MVP finalist, fantastic season. And guess what? Despite being the 5th highest paid second baseman, that's still a bargain. You're getting the 3rd guy in MVP voting at $15.2 million in 2025. Tell me that's not the best value maybe in Major League Baseball. What other guy upcoming can you realistically say can give me 40 home runs, 100 ribbies, near 1,000 OPS, be a guy that comes through every time in clutch situations, start games off at home runs? Like, who else offensively is doing what Ketel Marte is doing at his value, at his contract? Ohtani can give you what Ketel Marte could do. I guess Ohtani, technically, he's only making like $2 million a year. So maybe he's a bad example. But like Lindor, for example, Lindor is making double the amount of money as Ketel Marte. And I guess he should be, considering he was runner-up in MVP voting. But Lindor makes an insane amount. How much does Francisco Lindor make? He's the highest paid shortstop in Major League Baseball at $34 million. And, for a guy that finished runner-up in MVP voting, you would hope he lives up to this deal, right? But a guy like Ketel Marte making 15.2, making more than less than half of Francisco Lindor. Like, think about how crazy that is. And speaking of shortstop, our guy, Geraldo Perdomo, he's barely making anything. A couple $1,000,000, 23rd highest paid shortstop in Major League Baseball. I disrespected Perdomo this past year because when the D-backs were struggling in the first half and Domo was coming back, I was like, look, I like Domo. He's important, but I don't think he's going to change life or how bad this D-backs team is playing. And everything changed when Perdomo got back. Defense got better. The offense started clicking. Perdomo, I slept on him. And the fact that he's only the 23rd highest paid shortstop due to he's still in arbitration, like, that's insane. Eugenio Suarez, not even a top 12 highest paid third baseman. Eugenio is making $9.4 million. Eugenio just coming off a 30 home run, 100 RBI season. He's going to make less money than Yoan Moncada. He's going to make less money than Ryan McMahon. He's going to make less money than Chris Taylor of the LA Dodgers. Like, think about how insane of a value Eugenio was, how much of a godsend he was after seeing Evan Longoria there the year before and really having no one post Eduardo Escobar. Like, Eugenio was perfect last year for the D-backs. We know Jake McCarthy, Alec Thomas, they're making no money right now. Corbin Carroll, he did get himself a massive extension from the D-backs, but even with that extension, Corbin Carroll's still making essentially no money whatsoever. He's still maybe the best value in Major League Baseball at the current deal he's on. I mean, Corbin Carroll, his contract doesn't really balloon to like 2028 when it goes up to like $29 million. But until then, Corbin Carroll's making like under $15 million for like the next 4 seasons for a guy we saw as a rookie finish top 5 in MVP voting. Think about how insane that is. And so, yeah, you could maybe make the case that Lourdes Gurriel is like the most expensive or the worst like value D-backs position player, arguably. Like, he's making $14 million. He's the 23rd highest paid outfielder going into next year. Like, does that make him overrated? I don't know. Lourdes Gurriel's getting more money than like technically Brian Reynolds, Randy Arozarena, Jackson Churios next year. Like, I don't know. A lot of those guys are arbitration eligible. Like, I think when you look at all the position players for the D-backs, when you compare their contracts against the rest of the guys in Major League Baseball, like, Ketel Marte is like making the most at $15 million. And like, you MVP players should be making the most. But when your MVP player is at 15 and you got guys finishing, and you got guys who are arguably not even better than him in the MVP runner-up, status, and they're making double what Ketel Marte is making. Like, I think it's insane that the D-backs were able to get so many good contract values at so many different positions. I don't know if Naylor is going to be as good as Christian Walker, but getting that 6-7 years younger, I think is incredible value. Eugenio, not even a top 10 highest paid third baseman. Perdomo's arbitration, Moreno's arbitration, McCarthy's arbitration, Corbin Carroll's on one of the best deals in Major League Baseball. Like, the way they built up their position players and their lineup, and they can still go out there and maybe sign a Randall Grichuk or at least someone else that could be a right-handed bat for their DH position. Like, this is still going to be one of the best offenses in the National League next year, and it wasn't expensive at all to build. Why can't we see more teams take advantage of the market when teams like the Mariners are just salary dumping Eugenio Suarez? I wish I got to see more teams of the D-backs level, right? Not the big markets, but like these mid-market teams. There should definitely be more Arizona Diamondback level teams trying to go out there and trying to win against these big markets, and you just don't see it enough, and it's really disappointing. Again, the D-backs, I think, are putting on a clinic or putting on an example of how to build a roster, how to spend money on your roster smartly, and how to do it while going against some of the biggest markets in your own division. So right now, Mike Hazen, Ken Kendrick, kudos to those guys for building up this D-backs franchise. Now I want to discuss some Arizona Diamondbacks players that could be leaving in the next season or so due to contract status in segment number 3. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up the W. I love betting on which players will score a touchdown and how many points each team will score. It's thrilling. My favorite thing to do on the FanDuel Sportsbook app is the same game parlay. When I see that Arizona Cardinals are playing, sometimes I like to do a little Cardinals money line. Give me a little James Conner over on rushing touchdowns and give me Kyler Murray anytime touchdown. When that 3-leg hits, it brings a big smile to my face. So if you want a big smile on your face, just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more at FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right. Let's get back to the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. Let's discuss some players who could potentially be leaving soon just due to their contract status, because we know, as we've discussed, with that Corbin Burnes signing, it could potentially be insurance for Zach Gallen leaving. So who are some other D-backs players that are in that position, who are in that lame duck year, potentially pending free agents that, you might have to make a decision on, right? If the season goes sideways for whatever reason, some of these players you might have to trade off. Maybe there's another dude. Like, what if there's an injury to one of these guys? Someone else steps up, fills their shoes, and just steals their job, right? Those kind of situations are always possible. Maybe the player just straight up unhappy and wants like a change of scenery. You don't see that too much in Major League Baseball, but you never know. So mostly based off contract, these are guys who could be eligible, could be leaving the D-backs over the next year. Like we said, Zach Gallen's definitely one of them. Last year of arbitration, unrestricted free agent next year. And from all reports, I mean, it sounds like Zach Gallen wants to test free agency. It's his right as a player. Obviously, we all want him to stay. The milkman, Zach Gallen, has been my favorite pitcher the last few years. He's been a stud. We had him on the podcast before the start of the 2024 regular season. He's a great guy. Stud dude. He's a dude where he traded Jazz Chisholm, the #1 overall pick, for him in a straight up deal. Don't typically see that in Major League Baseball. And I would say it's a win-win. Obviously, Jazz isn't on the Marlins anymore, but Gallen has been an ace for Arizona and an unexpected ace as well, with the glasses, the long hair. Doesn't have the look of someone that should be a #1 starter, but definitely has that dog in him. Very excited to see Zach Gallen on the stage next season, but is someone that we do have to consider, knowing this rotation as loaded and as deep it is right now. Like, is Zach Gallen someone they should consider trading? Whether the season goes sideways or not, is it just smart and logical to trade Zach Gallen now instead of letting him walk for nothing in free agency? Or should you just say, we're going all in on this season, knowing Gallen is going to leave in free agency next year? Same case applies to Merrill Kelly. Is Merrill Kelly a guy they should think about trading in season to get the most out of his value, or do you just ride it all the way through? Merrill Kelly is a guy who I think will be a lot easier to re-sign because Zach Allen's probably going to command 25 to like 30 million a year. Kelly's probably only going to be around like 10 million a year. It's not going to be a lot of money for Merrill Kelly. He's definitely not a break the bank kind of pitcher. So even if the D-backs don't trade him at the deadline, even if they let him hit free agency, he's still a guy that we could re-sign in the offseason, but he is someone that will be a free agent at the end of the year. Same with Jordan Montgomery, but we all expect Jordan Montgomery to hopefully get traded this offseason. A guy like Eugenio Suarez, he is going to be a free agent at the end of 2025, and that is a position that the D-backs are going to have to think about was a contingency plan. I don't think you're trading Eugenio Suarez this year because you really don't have any good backup options on your farm system. But do you try to put Perdomo in more situations at third base just in case for next year? Maybe you want to use Perdomo as your third baseman and then do Jordan Lawler at shortstop. Maybe get Lawler sometime at third base. I don't know. Do you go out there and trade for someone that you would expect a year from now could potentially be someone that could be your starting third baseman? It's just something to consider. I find the idea of trading Eugenio super low, even if this season would have to go bad for us to trade a Eugenio, at least with Gallen or Merrill Kelly, because your rotation's so deep. You can always make the argument that it's just good value to trade them and maybe could help out a different spot in your lineup. Maybe could just get back some stuff for your farm system. Trading a Eugenio outside of your system, season being a disaster, really makes no sense. So I really don't expect the D-backs to do that unless we just have a season from hell. Josh Naylor, he's a pending free agent. He has a little bit more agency to being traded just because we do have Pavin Smith. If we really want to play a first baseman every day, we do at least have someone in the building that could do it. If we want to try to get the most value out of Josh Naylor before his free agency, if the season went sideways, but because he's only 27 years old, I think I would want to see what he has, what he can do for a season with the D-backs, and then potentially re-sign him in the offseason. And, maybe he's going to be looking for Christian Walker money, considering he's only going to be 28 years old, but he's also not as good as Christian Walker. So he's currently making 14.2 in arbitration. Like, he could probably get that same kind of money over a 3-year period once he hits free agency. And if that's true, I don't think that's like a bad deal to re-sign him to at all. And then really the only final guy that you have to think about that could be a free agent next year is Lourdes Gurriel, because he has a player option in 2026 for $13 million. So if he has a year from hell personally, or if the D-backs have a year from hell, then I could see Lourdes Gurriel leaving. But he seems like he fits this D-backs organization in terms of the vibe, the culture, great locker room presence. And $13 million, I still think is pretty decent money for Lourdes Gurriel. It's not like crazy money, but I don't know if he can do really any better than that on the open market. So I would expect, if anything, Lourdes Gurriel to re-sign with Arizona in 2026. But outside of that, you do have to be mindful of Zach Gallen and Merrill Kelly. You do have to be mindful of a Eugenio Suarez and Josh Naylor. And that's really it. We know Jordan Montgomery is probably going to be traded this offseason, but I'm really looking at Zach Allen, Merrill Kelly, the rotation members, as what's really going to go down in terms of, is it smart to trade them mid-season, whether the season's a disaster or not. Trade them at the deadline just so you don't lose them for nothing this offseason. That might be a conversation Mike Hazen and the D-backs front office will have to have. But if I'm them, I'm not doing it. I'm writing it all the way through. Give me a rotation of Burnes, Gallen, and Kelly, and I think that's good enough to potentially win it all. Now, that's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back next week for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy, dose.